Alleluia. Mani Allah.
Hi, I'm Norm Curry, presenter of Harmony and Diversity. Earlier this year, I chaired a panel discussion at a Harmony Day event for the Frankston Interfaith Network. This was held at the Frankston Library. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we're only able to start the recording about halfway through the discussions. The discussions consisted of a series of questions and responses from the panel on various interfaith issues. We followed this by questions from the audience. Here, now, is the second half of that panel discussion. The next question, which will go to Jay, so you don't have to be last next time, is there one particular government policy which impacts on your religious and spiritual beliefs? Just one. There are probably many.
I was going to say only one. The big one for me is the situation we have with asylum seekers at the moment. For my beliefs and my stance, how can we refuse these people? How can we treat them the way that they are being treated? How can the government put these policies into place where children are in detention and people are locked away for years at a time? It makes me sit and shake my head as to how can we do this to people? And so that would be the big one for me.
And the second one?
And a second one? Oh, well, the second one then I would say is the interventions with the Indigenous people. And again, in that is recognising and respecting them as a people, them as people, and the ability to be part of, all of us living together. May I share one story? If we do have time. I was listening to an Indigenous elder share a story about how he had come out of country and gone to a capital city because his son was graduating university. And so that was a really big thing for that family. He had gone into town to buy a suit so that he looked good at that institution or at that time. And when it was all organised and he had bought his suit, they couldn't sell it to him unless they rang up the social security people to say that it was okay for him to buy a suit. Where is the respect in that?
It's astounding.
Yep.
It's astounding. I hope you're all listening to these points because you're going to be asked questions later. All right? I'm going to say who said what, and you've got to tell me. Jacqueline, media, one particular government policy which stubs the Brahma Kumari's toes.
I can't do one particular policy. I thought about it and thought, what is the thing that we would really support the government in? And I was thinking that the use of public money in ways that would uplift people, and I mean, here we have an example, the use of public money in ways that encourage people, honour people, increase their dignity, and I'm not going to identify the use of public money in areas that don't do this to people, don't enhance their happiness and their control on their own lives and their own dignity. But that would be something the Brahma Kumaris would like to see happen more generally. It's in line with our policy of generally uplifting people and building their own confidence and their own self-respect and their own dignity.
That's an interesting take. Sunim, for you, media.
Yes, I suppose government. Asylum seekers would have to be, I guess, the first one for all of us, really. It's the obvious in the sense that all of us embrace no harm, care, compassion for all beings. So that's my number one, and that's it. It echoes the first precept of the Buddhist faith, which is to do no harm to all beings. But I also just want to mention the climate change and general destruction of ecosystems and habitats and forests, because I think that that's that's a really primary one that perhaps is not right in our face at the moment, but it's insidious, and it's going on at a rate that potentially is irretrievable at this point. And I think government after government turns a blind eye to it because they see it as a long-term issue, and government is generally only concerned with short-term immediate issues. And so I guess in support of my Brahma Kumaris colleague, I would say that I'd like to see a government that has the maturity and has the courage to take on long-term issues and to put some money behind those, not just short-term issues that they're going to get immediate votes for the next time they come round. So that's my concern.
And your concern about the environment would be the whole sentient and non-sentient issue.
Of course, it harms immeasurably beings, both visible and not so visible, and it potentially makes the planet uninhabitable for all of us. And in the sense of a Buddhist perspective, we believe that that everything is interdependent. So while we're busily destroying environments around us, we're also destroying ourselves, because we can't continue to live without the dependency of other beings, of other habitats. So yeah, it's.
Thank you, Sunim. Nasira, from an Islamic point of view, what does the government policies that knock you about?
I suppose from my point of view, as well as looking at the inequality of people. Going back to what you're talking about with the Indigenous people, how they have one rule for them and another rule for us, which is totally unfair. The issue to do with making sure that everyone has the same rights as each other. I think it's a big part in it. And it's an Islamic thing for us to look at everyone equally, and that there's no race greater than the other or sex greater than the other. We're all got roles to play in humanity, and I also look at the fear of the rich and poor divide in this country as well. That if everything goes user pays, how are we going to get everyone lifted from the bottom? So that's one thing that does stress me.
You can see it emerging. It would be good or beneficial for the government when they're making regulations and legislation, that's the other one, to have a panel like this to sit there and discuss things with, wouldn't it? Because it brings out this essence of the person, looking through the prism of their religion, but also there's a basic ground which is undeniable in all places, and you can hear it coming through from this commentary. Now, entertainment. Now, this opens Pandora's box because there's such a wide range. But what's the situation with Nasira? Entertainment. That's across the board. Live shows, even advertising, which can be entertaining, and movies, the lot. What do you reckon?
I suppose, as we get older as well, we look at life a little differently than we did when we were young. But of course, the issue to do with morality in our media as well, and to do with entertainment and things like that, a lot of stuff that they do these days, they don't really need to put in there, and we all know what they've been doing, so we don't need to actually see everything. That really annoys me. It's just, it's always been one of my pet peeves, but anyway. And the other aspect, obviously, we sometimes get stereotyped, but that's okay. I mean, that can be worth a laugh sometimes as well. But it's just, in general, I look at it and I think, is it really reflective of our society, or is it trying to bring our society into something else that it's not already? That always makes me worry about that. And I look at the 1980s shows on TV where it was all about the moral of the story, when you look at kids' programs in those days. And now, where is that? You don't seem to see it in the same way that we used to. So I suppose that's one of those things. But yes, Muslims can have fun and we can enjoy our life. I know a lot of people think that we just sit at home and we just pray all day, but we do pray, but we also can have fun, we can laugh, and we can watch movies as long as they're appropriate. So it's all good.
Good. Well, that does sound very good. But there's a lot of conspiracy theories which float around, and oftentimes the people who propagate them need some looking at themselves. But there are conspiracy theories which indicate that there may in fact be drivers behind the media and drivers behind the entertainment industry which actually do not have the collective interest at heart. They have their own particular box of tricks which they're trying to promote. And I think from Nasir, that's part of Nasir's point there. Sunim.
Yes, look, I suppose from a Buddhist perspective, you know, Buddhism's quite big on self-responsibility. So I think in this respect, you know, I'd be saying the media is vast. We must exercise a choice ourselves about what we're going to turn on in the TV, what movies we're going to watch, what we're going to read. And this is, I guess, this echoes one of the basic kind of guidelines of life that as Buddhists we try to follow, which is mindful consumption. So I think that traditionally meant alcohol and drugs, what you put into your body, but it's also about what we take into our minds, you know, what filters we ourselves take responsibility for maintaining, so that, you know, we're not subject to things that we have a choice to be able to turn off or turn away from. So,
yes, that raises a point. Many of you, or none of you perhaps, know that the pornography industry is one of the third or fourth largest industries in the world. Billions and billions of dollars for the pornography industry, which tends to reflect what Sunim's saying. People must be consuming it. I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up, but people must be doing it, because why would they be making so much money out of it? How can it be propagated like that? So and that drives out, as Sunim said, out of the Buddhist perspective of mindful consumption, and that extends to what you actually take in through your eyes. Jacqueline.
Well, thank you for that. Around about the 90s, the Brahma Kumaris founded a program called Images, Voices and Hope, of Hope, that's right. Images, Voices of Hope. You can Google it. And this was recognizing that reporters, news views, restorative narrative and the impact it has on the public. And the people who are behind this are honourable and may wish to get their good views across. And so it gathered together and has every year since, and created an international dialogue between people of the media who would come and to talk about this positive media presentation. And that program's proved very popular. It started in the States, but we've now done it in UK and in other European countries. And I think that sums up the way we felt to approach the presentation of kind of stories, again, with that aim of uplifting people and, you know, and bringing benefit to the whole. But also, of course, news items. And so it's not simply just positive news items, although that is part of it, but it's just the whole attitude towards what you were talking about, this kind of theory of promoting things that are commercially viable but not, say, socially viable.
And that group was that Images and Voices of Hope?
Yes, www.ivoh.org.
Would be well worth looking at. Thank you very much, Jacqueline. Jay.
The entertainment media, as we've said, is just so vast, and I think one of the important things is that ability to choose, and choose well, and keep up look at the morals behind it, and that's what I sit. And when I choose my styles, I have what I'm looking for. I'm not someone who's into heavily violence or the other side heavily pornographic or language or whatever. So I think one of the things that we are entrusted to do is to help our younger people also to learn how to choose what to view. And that's a challenge, as always. They have sometimes different ideas. But I have to admit I use a lot of media in my teaching. And there are some beautiful movies and images and music that can touch people and take them to another place, that can connect with them and enhance a message or enhance a moral. And it's part of that choice. And so that idea of choosing, I think, is an important one in what we do. We are a very broad people as the world. Therefore, we've got a lot of broad entertainment that is supplied to that. And some of it's good, in my point of view, some of it's not. But that choice, I think, is very important in there.
Yes, it's preparing people, young people, to be able to have the framework to make satisfactory choices within. And that tends to draw upon a level of courage which a lot of people simply have had washed out of them by being bombarded by the media, where they sit there and they have an original idea, and then once they watch a little bit of the media coverage at that point, they have lost their grip and off they slip. Now, if they're going to turn around and give to their children direction, they need to be sure of it themselves. So it really is a very serious issue within society. And you can see, I don't know how you're finding this, but this is great. Do you agree? It's great? Loud, great, that's good. Because you're actually getting these different perspectives, but they're actually the same when you come to the core of it. They're the same. Okay, well, let's your imaginations run, Jay, and say, well, what's one thing, and you can throw a few extras in, we've got a little bit of time, that you'd like to be achieved for your spiritual perspective and your beliefs this year? What would you like for Christianity this year?
I'd like Christians not to be scared of having conversations with people who don't believe in Christianity. I would love us to be that idea of Christ who was welcoming to all, who was respective of all, who would have conversations and would push people to think just that little bit further. And that's what I would love to see us. It is, as I said at the beginning, what drives me, but to be able to sit here and have a conversation with different faiths and to understand and respect where they come from, and not to be scared to ask questions to clarify not only their faith but my faith, would be, just think of what the world would be like. Amazing. So that's a challenge. Whether we'll ever get there, probably not. But that's what I would love for us to achieve. If we could do it in 1 year, that would be stunning. But it may take a few more than that.
Yes. I think that this is where the media, of course, does play a big role, because actually the mention of Jesus Christ oftentimes will close a television station down. In conversations you'll have, and you may find this yourselves, is that as soon as, and I deal with multi-faith, so I'm not one or any of the others, as soon as you start to talk about Jesus, up it goes, like that. Complete reaction to Jesus. I'm not making any quality judgment there. I'm just simply saying that, as Jay points out, cannot be healthy for anybody. It needs to be spoken about. The same thing happens in some ways. I'm jumping ahead of you in this era, but the same thing happens sometimes with Islam, because up it goes. You're a terrorist, and that's the end of it. We're not going to even listen to you. It's pretty sad. Anyhow, I'm not interviewing here to interview myself. Boy, I get started on the way. Jacqueline.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to pursue the aim we have at the retreat centre, that we can create a place that's open to the community, that's a place of trust, openness, certainly welcomingness, but somewhere where anyone can come and sustain their own self-respect and strengthen their own spiritual centre, I suppose, their own spiritual qualities. So that's not any particular spiritual faith, but to come to strengthen that faith, that they could see a community, and that's certainly I am, a community in action there that can give you that confidence it's possible to be spiritual in this day and age and be normal. So I guess that, because what I would like to see from people who come there and who go from there is that they strengthen their own self-respect and their own belief in their own spiritual identity. So that has to do with enhancing a lot of spiritual qualities, and certainly there's methods appropriate with that.
Yes.
But that's what I'd like to see happen there.
Which reminds one of Joseph Campbell's perspective, was the God with 1,000 faces. Each person has a different face for their divine image, which that process encourages people to connect with. Sunim.
I suppose I've thought about this one long and hard, and I think what I'd like to see for this year, not only for my own faith, not only for Buddhists, particularly for Buddhists, because it's one that's close to my heart at the moment, but also for other faith traditions as well, that women in the faith tradition are given an opportunity to take much more leading roles in the ordained community. Many people think that in the Buddhist community that this is not an issue, but in fact it is an issue. And I'm fortunate to belong to a tradition, a particular lineage, the Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Buddhists, where I can ordain to the same level as men. But many of the traditions one can't do that, and so women still play a very inferior role in the Buddhist community and not recognised as not empowered for priestly duties, and not recognised really as teachers, as leaders. And so I'd like to see this just take another level in a way that, and I understand very, very directly that this is an issue for women in many of the faith traditions. It's probably not looking good this year, but we'll keep it up there on top of the agenda of what we want.
It's clearly no accident that all the representatives here are women. In fact, I'm self-conscious about even being here. But that's a very cogent point, of course. And you're right. You do get the impression that Buddhism isn't like that, but it's interesting to say that it is.
Very much so.
Yes. Nasira.
For me, I suppose, looking at Islam, what I'd really want for my Muslim brothers and sisters is to reflect on their faith, reflect within, to really discover their faith, not just, what their mother or father has said, but actually sit there and reflect on the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and really see how that can benefit humanity. If they really understood the teachings, they could see that we are here on earth to make the world a better place and to worship God. That is our role here. And if we actually see that, we would feel that inner peace, and we would have less aggressiveness, I suppose, as well, if we could actually sit there and reflect within and realise that we have to get ourselves right first. Instead of telling other people what they should be doing, we should be looking within and seeing how we can improve ourselves first. Having that self-reflection every night and saying, what can I do more to worship God better and to make myself a better human being?
Well, that's a very reflective observation, and once again is echoed from right across the panel. Now, we've actually come to the point where we've actually made really good time. So I can hear the energy arising out there from questions. So it's almost blowing the lid off. So are there any questions, please? Any questions of any of our panellists? Or, yes, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. My question is directed to all four of you ladies. First of all, could you explain what the word God means for you? That's question number one. And it follows on from that. With the present day lack of interest in religion in the world, do you feel that if a person lives his or her life believing in the human values of love, truth, non-violence and peace, that this could also be termed as a spiritual person or a religious person?
Two very small questions there, Pam. You guys could deal with that quite quickly. Does anyone want to jump in there first?
I can do it if you
Yes?
like.
Yes.
The first one, God, of course, is a little bit more interesting well, maybe not so interesting from a Buddhist perspective, because we don't actually believe in a one supreme God, an infinite God. There are many gods in the cosmology of the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, which is the northern Buddhism, which I belong to. But all gods we believe, or not we believe. This is the teaching that everything that comes into being passes away, as do gods. Some of them may live for a very long time, but they will still pass away. So God is not a concept in our faith tradition. The second one, I think, is a very interesting question, actually, because I think that, as Pamela says, I mean, now we're seeing the census results every time that there's a census in Australia, and not just Australia, around the world, and more people are putting up their hand and and saying they don't have a religious affiliation, and I think that for me, in being back in Australia these few years, that's something that I've been very interested to try and understand in terms of what's happening for people and what people's spiritual identity, how they see themselves as spiritual beings and what's important to them. And I would say, for myself, I'm not interested really to hold on to the religious prescriptions. What I'm interested in is to see people become empowered in their own spiritual self, however that is, whatever that means to them. And for each person, that will have some, there'll be commonalities, but there'll also be some differences. So I think it's an interesting transition in human consciousness, really, and human expression, and one that I'm watching with great interest. So thank you.
And I'm sure that bounces off one of you to come in on the tail end of that.
All right, I'll go. I love that idea of what you were saying about the spiritual in the person and what it may be. I had one conversation that was trying to put faith versus religion, and that idea of faith being an inner belief, an inner feeling, whereas religion is something that, and I may be generalising here, but because we are people who like structure and form, that's what religion has become, the structure and form. So that idea of someone who is doing their best, living their best to be as respectful and aware and working within the community, whether they are spiritual or religious, I don't think we need to worry. For me, it's probably a little bit of both. There is that direction, that drawing, that feeding of what is deep inside that person that would be driving them. And that can be classed as either spiritual or religious. I think the fact that they are following that and working and treating fellow human beings in that way is fantastic. If only we would do more of that. And that kind of talks a little bit for me as to my impression of God. And God, I don't see as a person. I see God is being also implies personhood, but I'm not trying to say that there is personhood. I think God is too big for us to put boundaries of a human person around that. For me, God is that comfort, that journeyer, that idea that I am not alone. There is a greater something that we work towards, that we strive towards. And there is a presence of love in the world, and that's through God for me. There you go.
Yeah, that was thanks very much, Day. That answered both questions very succinctly. And Jacqueline's lining up. I think you're going to say something.
So I'll pick up on the point you made first, Jay, in that for us it's understanding who you are. So we place our very first understanding and reflection is on I am a spiritual being, and that this is, we even identify in saying I'm a soul, which is different from matter, so that I am the spiritual energy in this body of matter. And so we make those two distinctions quite clearly. And so that spiritual energy has to do with everything that's positive, and it's absolutely essential that I have a positive attitude towards whatever I'm doing in my life, and our teachings would be towards that as well. And so I'd also like to just digress a little bit and pick up on a point that you made there. The founder of this organisation in the early 30s saw the need for these kinds of nurturing qualities in the world, and with the agreement of all those who were part of that founding group, put women in the leadership positions. And so they were quite young women at that time, so it was a bit like a youth organisation. But they were made the teachers, and certainly the instructions, the researching they did, the understanding they came to, it has still remained that way. The senior positions are held by women, although there are equal men and women in the organisation, and certainly we couldn't have got anywhere without the men being the backbone and the support of the organisation. But in this, women have maintained the leading teaching roles. So in terms then of who am I, that I'm a spiritual being, I'm in this matter, and that spirituality for us is all those positive qualities that would go with our understanding of God. We would see God as a very positive being, as a being of kindness, of love, certainly of love, of kindness, of consideration, and of understanding how to achieve those kind of qualities in our own life. That would be our connection with God as well.
Mm.
Okay, for me, for us as a Muslim, Allah, or the God, literally, is a creator and sustainer of the universe, that he's outside of creation, so he's not created, so he can't die. He always has and he always will be. For us, our connection is to him, that he is greater than us. We can be nothing like him in that regard. We have what we classify as the 99 names of Allah, including the Creator, the Forgiving, the Most Merciful, the Loving. So all of those attributes are Almighty God's attributes, and we focus on those. And I suppose when it comes to the other question of other people that are on the path spiritually, well, we would say that Allah is the judge. Who are we to make a judgment call on anyone? In the end, he's the creator of us human beings from our perspective, so he's the only one that can say if he accepts or he doesn't accept their worship as they are doing. So for us, it's like, well, as long as you're not hurting anyone, then do what you're going to do. But for us, we've got a set program of what we have to do, and that's what fulfills us. But other people are on a different journey. But that's him to make the judge, not us.
Can I just say something?
Sure, certainly.
Just to clarify here a little bit, just listening to the panel and something that has come up many times, I guess, in conversation around interfaith is, in a Buddhist perspective, in a very simple way of explaining it, we talk about everything coming from the one, in a sense, and so I think that this one is probably has the greatest correspondence to what we talk about in a Christian sense as God, or in a Islamic sense. So I think language becomes quite, can become quite. It can become an obstacle in a sense when we're translating from. Buddha was an Indian. He grew up in the Hindu faith, so his language and his concepts, arose from there. And we come into a Western Judaic faith tradition, and I would just offer that as a correspondence.
Yeah, that's an extremely salient point, because a lot of the religions talk about the fact that God is unknowable, unnameable, and everything else, and then proceed to write copious volumes to describe God. There's this essential removal of the whole human perspective from your opportunity or the potential to see God's face is critical, and our mind has a pretty strong hold on us. And we've just been discussing across the panel over the questions the fact of the mind. The mind is the bit that gets locked up in the media. The mind is the bit that gets locked up in the entertainment industry. The mind is the bit that gets locked up in Parliament, locked up in legislation. So it's a mind issue. And as from a Buddhist point of view, of course, that's quite comfortable. In fact, may I ask a question? The mind issue, how does the mind rest with you as being the principle, not the dark side, but the principle which stands between us and being truly able to see the face of God?
Are you asking a question?
Yes, I'm thinking that was a good question. It's totally stunned them. Yes, no, it was just a spontaneous.
My teacher used to say, "Open mouth, big mistake." So actually,
Yes.
trying to address questions like that. Because we're talking about profundities, aren't we? We're talking about things that really we can't name, the unknowable. But I guess I think what Norm is actually referring to in terms, certainly in the Buddhist sense, is that we talk about everything as created by mind alone, and so mind is everything in a sense. But again, that's not, and that's particularly from my tradition, a Zen tradition. It may be different from the direction of other traditions, but again, it's something that we don't talk about. We don't get into trying to define too much. So I'll leave it.
And I'm not going to ask any more questions. Are there? Yes, please.
Yes, I've got two questions, and one question actually is sort of aimed at this sort of issue. We're living in a time of unprecedented scientific, technological advances, and I was wondering how each of your faiths you resolve, or at least balance, the fundamental contradiction between the faith process, if you like, and the scientific process, which sometimes seem to be contradictory. And my other question is there a danger in the interfaith culture, if you like, of homogenising the spiritual experience in a way that, in the end, doesn't celebrate our differences, but seeks to find some rather simplistic solution to the larger question? Okay.
I'll jump in, only because I recently had the first question discussion with a young man in my youth group who came and said, how can we believe in these scientists and yet believe in Jesus? And where do they meet? And I went, whoa, what a great question. Let's talk deeply, which we will do at one stage. But initially my answer to him was, we have been created in the Christian values to be the image of God. God doesn't stop I don't believe, us developing and growing. And science is part of that mind that is continually being improved. There are certainly questions of morals within science, and I'm not going to head on that direction because we could all be in different places with that. But my way of reconciling the two, we are created to be these people who are continually searching, continually improving, finding ways of doing that, whether it's scientific or spiritual values as well. We do both. We could search and continue. So I don't see them as fighting against each other. I see them as us learning and growing. And I think probably then our connection with those comes from our moral stances, our inside compass, for want of a better word. So that's where I would sit with that first one. With the second point, I was in 2012 at an international conference of chaplains from around the world, and it was an interfaith conference. One of the beautiful things that somebody said to me is that we stand and we interact with people of different faiths and beliefs, but we stand strongly in our own belief. So any conversation I have with even my fellow panel members comes from my point of view to begin with. And part of my challenge is to be open to listen and respect their point of view. So I actually don't think a true interfaith gathering can be not worthwhile or not of learning or not of value. There you go.
Thank you, Jo.
Likewise. I think that science is bringing, because in our faith, in our tradition, we believe that what we think is very effective to what happens in our lives, that predicts, there's consequences in every cause, that kind of thing. But so that our thinking very much affects the way we... I'm really interested actually in the way science is coming up with the brain that, restores itself and all this kinds of things that are happening. So I'm very much for the modern advances of science. And in terms of creativity story, if that's what you're referring to, I think there are advances, as Jay has said, that are very valuable for us and we take advantage of. In terms of interfaith gatherings and the result thereof, I see that the more we get together and the more we see people behaving in respectful and congenial and conducive ways with one another in the world, and that kind of change comes about, we will see the result of interfaith working multinationally rather than in a homogenous way. Our behaviour towards one another is what I would call the basis of improving our society.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Of course, Buddhism never had an argument with science. In fact, it's interesting to see in this time that science is actually now revealing some evidence of the teachings of the Buddha from 2,600 years ago. So science is catching up. And we see His Holiness the Dalai Lama as one example. He will regularly engage with scientists in dialogue, and we very much recognise the importance of rationality, of that what is evidenced is very important to take on board. But look, I was very heartened recently to come across I think in the early this decade, there's an American scientist he's actually comes from a biological background, and he has a new theory called biocentrism, and this is the first time that there's been any attempt really to break down the subject-object view. Of course, science was always looking from the object point of view, but of course the Buddha, what he revealed in terms of insight from his deep practice was actually, from the position of non-subject, non-object. So he actually experienced rather than looked in and saw. And if you look in from an objective point of view, you're never going to fully, comprehend the nature of reality and consciousness and everything. But this biocentrism is the first time that there's been any real acknowledgement that consciousness has a very large, in fact, a leading role in influencing, I don't know, the word is not correct, but somehow, influencing the nature of the world around us. So I was very heartened by that.
Thank you, Sunim.
For us as Muslims, we look at science as not being at all against our faith at all. In the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala often tells us to reflect and look at His creation, to look at it deeply, learn from it, reflect. So it's sort of, to us, seeking knowledge is an act of worship. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said to them in Arabia at the time, go and seek knowledge wherever you have to go, even if you have to go to China. And of course to them, China was a long way off, but it was basically showing that it's not just religious knowledge that you're seeking, but knowledge of life itself, our surrounds, our environment. So as a Muslim, we look at science as something really positive, something that we can focus on. My eldest son at the moment is at RMIT doing biotechnology. Part of the things that drew him to doing that is actually from his faith. He wanted to look at everything from a truly DNA point of view, to try and really look at how Allah created us and look at it from a very positive point of view. So I look at science as something that's my friend, not my foe.
Thank you. And hear that bell? That's spot on. The timing is brilliant. Thanks very much. Look, I think that we're now going to go into a 3-minute meditation, which I have the honour to lead you in. After which you'll fill in the harmony cards. But I think would be nice to applaud right now these 4 panellists who actually poured a lot of their essence into this, and fortunately, from part of the conversation, from a feminine perspective, which is a value in itself. So let's applaud them. Thank you very much.